Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday afternoon. We're at the last session of the day. And so we're going to start off today with three lightning talks. And I'm just going to introduce the speakers and we'll get started and to give them plenty of time if people have questions. Remember, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. I can pop them up on the screen. Um, yeah, should be interesting. So we have three talks this afternoon. The first one is by Andrew Pappas from the Indiana State Department of Health, and the title is Water Access Determination Using GIS-Based Data Analysis. The second is by Gerald Clarke from the town of Dover in Maryland. Are private wells and water conservation incompatible? And the third is by Yilin, Zhuang, and Andrea Albertin from the University of Florida Extension, and it's challenges and opportunities facing the Florida well owner network. All right, we'll see you on the other side.
My name is Andrew Pappas from the Indiana Department of Health. Welcome to my lightning session on water access determination using GIS-based data analysis. I'm going to present some information on using different disparate data sources to find water wells. In this Indiana State Board of Health monthly bulletin dated October 1899, you can clearly see there is a focus on water quality dating back decades in our state. Using GIS over the last several years, our program's been able to understand nearly 2 million individuals in Indiana use private water supplies that are unregulated. We've got growing concerns about specific contaminants in those water supplies, and we've seen an increase in our ability to test, report, and view data. Well management in Indiana has lots of challenges. Some of them include being a home rule state, where water is generally unregulated outside of installation in public water supplies. 92 counties means 92 different laws. In addition, state entities and federal entities have oversight to access and use of water throughout the state. That variability in rules can be challenging. This map shows the patchwork of regulated water in pink, public water suppliers in green dots, and private water wells in blue dots that exist in Indiana. But the map on the last page doesn't quite give us all the details that we can get to. It gives us some customer information and some other details that have been aggregated, but we think we can get to a higher level resolution. Our water variability is different across the state, and we know that a lot of our water wells are in the northern part and regulated water in the south. What we want to understand is where are the actual water users, not just where the wells have been drilled. Our Environmental Public Health Division has lots of different data sets on regulated facilities and types of waters that they use, but understanding individual properties can get more challenging. So looking across the landscape of what other partners were doing with mapping, including nitrogen, nitrate concentrations, arsenic across the state, we wanted to see what could we do with other unconventional supplies of data. So what we did is go to our state budget agency and look at our county records for all the properties that were out there and saw that we could get information about those properties' water supplies and pair it up with our Department of Natural Resources data. Using ArcGIS, we brought those parcels in and started to review them based on a number of characteristics to determine whether or not we could use property details and water supply maps to determine if a water supply existed at the property. Unfortunately, our conclusion wasn't quite what we thought it would be. We had a lot of properties in municipal water service areas that lacked the data in the assessor table to understand whether or not that property had access to municipal water. We also became aware that the property in our parcel database was sometimes out of date, not providing the most recent constructions in areas of new development. So after understanding poor spatial data from our Department of Natural Resources, well logs, and the other data challenges that were out there, we decided to push in another direction. One of the most important attributes to us will be the dwelling. We want to know if a dwelling is on real property to make a determination of if that dwelling literally has access to a regulated water supplies service area. When controlling for a dwelling on a parcel outside of a water service supply area, we were able to determine some counties had dependence on private water supplies as high as 82.3% of the population. In the example below, you'll be able to see these parcels have identified in Department of Natural Resources water well logs, and these parcels have dwellings outside of the regulated water districts here in blue. This tool is excellent for helping understand where water supplies are in communities and rural areas. It should not be substituted for field verification, especially when dealing with hazardous waste exposures. This work was completed on behalf of an ASTO fellowship and was done with our Public Health Geographics office here at the Department of Health. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Dover is a small residential community outside of Boston that is totally dependent on its own groundwater. 49% of the municipalities in Massachusetts are under 10,000, and so Dover is even smaller than that. 10% of the communities in Massachusetts are dependent on private well, and Dover is totally dependent on either private well or small PWSs that are nothing more than big wells in the town. Everybody's drawing the same water. When we had droughts past several years, we've been very much aware of the fact that the state wasn't prepared to deal with properly announcing it. There is the problem that those who believe that the water under their feet is their own, how do you tell them that they have to conserve? Of course, out west, there's a totally different ethic, and that is the water that falls on your roof may not even be yours. One of the best examples of that is that in Northern California, Harvard University recently purchased the groundwater rights up in the North Vineyards. So who regulates all of this? Massachusetts utility regulators do regulate public water supply companies that are of significant size, but pays no attention to smaller PWSs and has absolutely nothing to do with private wells. Private well owners in Dover, well, the best we can estimate based on what we see that small PWSs have, they have the same irrigation bounce. They have far more than 65 gallons per person per day consumption. So how do we deal with this? We don't have meters. We have no measurement of consumption. We have no knowledge of what they're doing. And of course, you have the problem that some people believe it's their water. We used to have wells that were 35 to 50 feet. That's no longer true. And last year we had the result of boil water orders 3 times because the local PWS that uses the same water, same groundwater, was overdrawing and as a result pulled contaminant in from adjacent septic. Dover's in a microclimate. NWS doesn't pay much attention to us. We can't get good estimates of what our precipitation is. So we've gone forward and we are installing precipitation gauges and high functionality weather stations so that we can correlate precipitation to the groundwater that we are monitoring with monitoring wells and stream flow. We're also introducing a significant amount of signage to communicate the need for conservation. We're using websites, we're using email. The core message is, it's your well, you better darn protect it. These are the types of signs we're using that correlate with the state's brand new measurement of drought and declarations, from 1 up to 4. So we have seen an improvement based on the peer pressure that neighbors put on people to stop using their irrigation systems. That has worked. And if all that fails, well, let's face it, the ultimate convincer is to remind people that if they overdraw on their well, and if it fails, what happens to the value of their property?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Central District. My colleague, Dr. Andrea Albertin, and myself are working on the development of the Florida Well Owner Network. Today, I'm going to share some challenges and opportunities facing the Florida Well Owner Network. So first, let's have a look at private wells in Florida. An estimated 2.5 million Floridians rely on private wells for home consumption. It translates to 12% of the population in Florida. However, limited public data exists on how many well users regularly test their water or drink from contaminated wells. Meanwhile, most well users also rely on septic systems to treat and dispose of their household sewer. Nearly 1 in 3 households in Florida depends on septic systems. It is estimated more than 2.5 million septic systems are in use across the state of Florida. Septic systems are identified as a major source of nitrogen loading to the impaired water bodies in Florida. Therefore, the UF IFAS extension is developing the Florida Well Owner Network. We aim to educate residents about well water quality and best practices to ensure well maintenance and groundwater protection, to facilitate access to well water sampling and provide information about treatment options. We also want to complement efforts by other agencies to increase awareness among Floridians about their wells and septic systems. Before the official establishment of Florida Well Owner Network, there were well and septic system education at county level offered by UF IFAS Extension. However, our first statewide sampling event was facilitated by the collaboration with the Virginia Tech Rapid Grant after Hurricane Irma. We were able to test 179 samples for bacteria and inorganic annelids. I was the water agent in Marion County back then. I presented the results to the local health department and obtained a 2-year funding to provide well education and sampling for up to 20 people per month. A total of 371 people participated in this educational program. 214 samples were collected to test bacteria. Compared to after Irma, the bacteria positive rate in Marion County was 26%. And this baseline non-emergency testing showed 18% of samples detect bacteria. Right before we plan to adopt Marion County model to other counties, the pandemic happened. So we have to switch from in-person workshops to webinars. Right now, we are conducting in-service training for extension agents, organizing hybrid and in-person workshops and sampling events for residents. We have created some educational materials like this infographic at the right bottom. We'd like to create more educational materials as well as to develop a centralized website to house all the materials and promote our events. The Florida Well Owner Network, however, is facing 3 main challenges: funding, testing, and research. We do receive mini grants from local agencies to enable one-time sampling events at no cost or reduced cost. However, we don't have a large grant to sustain a statewide effort. In addition, the University of Florida does not have a drinking water testing lab. All the samples were handled by external commercial labs. It has added additional cost and logistic difficulties. in the line with the lack of testing lab at the university, we are also looking for partners to conduct baseline water quality in Florida and also emergency contaminants in private wells in Florida. With that, we would like to take any questions and comments you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to mention that Andrea Albertin is also joining us from the University of Florida Extension. Yilin and Andrea, I think you're both at our 2019 conference. I know Andrea is at our 2017 conference as well. It's good to see you all, and you too, Andrew, and Gerald, good to meet you. I apologize for saying Maryland. I'm not sure why I did. I know, given the conversation this week, you've talked a lot about Massachusetts. I've actually worked in Massachusetts a fair amount, but never in Maryland, really. So I don't know what happened there, but I apologize. So if anybody has any questions, you need to put them in the chat box. So far, we actually don't have any questions. I do have one for Yilin and Andrea. So your baseline sampling was 18%, and then after Irma, the sampling that was done then was 26%. Can you use that data to try to get funding? It seems like, that is a hot topic, emergency response. I don't know anything offhand, but given the prevalence of the hurricanes we have and the way things have changed over the last few years, it seems like that's really good, useful information all by itself. And it's really great that you're able to collect that and have those two data sets to put together. So I know funding is always an issue, for sure.
One of the strange things that I'm finding here in Massachusetts and in New England is funding is not so much an issue because the state has been willing to provide funding. The difficulty is that there are no such support structures as I'm now finding out exist in central part of the country, in the Midwest and the far West. The only one I was aware of was in New Hampshire. So this whole 3 days has been an eye-opener to me of what other people have been able to do. Our difficulty is we have funding, but it isn't for personnel. So if you look at private wells in Massachusetts are 10% of the entirety of the population. The state doesn't give a hoot, plain, pure, and simple.
Well, there's a lot of other things in that, I think, Gerald, related to the fact that it's all regulated at a local level. There's a lot of disparity between your 350 plus health districts and all those things.
Let's be clear that when you say it's all regulated, the state provides that the local boards of health have the right to regulate, okay? However, they don't provide any mechanism for authority. There is no means of enforcing regulations.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. And we have a question that's come in. I'm going to go to that, and it's for Yilin. What kind of logistical problems did you encounter with using private labs? That's a really good question.
Yes, it's a really good question. So the private lab we use, we were very fortunate to get a contract deal. But that lab, that lab doesn't take samples from residents directly. So which makes extension as a middle point. We have to we handle all the sample collecting and also paperwork, because the lab doesn't actually, it works well because the lab doesn't want the homeowner's info, and homeowners don't want to share the info with lab. So extension in the middle as like a non-biased entity collect homeowners' personal info and send it to the lab. Lab enjoys that, homeowners enjoying that. But the only thing is just take bacteria example. The holding time is 30 hours. So we have to take everything into consideration. Lab won't take it after 24 hours. They need time to put on the incubator. And homeowners collect that. We need to fill all the forms. So every single form for the lab. So that's already, it's like in the county. So if we do this event in nearby county, considering 2 hours driving or even 4 hours driving, then add a little bit more difficulties for because it's a certified commercial lab. They have to meet all the standard. That's why we are thinking to use university lab as a sampling instead of its testing.
So, did I hear you right in that the private lab doesn't want the personal well owner information? That's completely backwards from everything I've ever heard. Most well owners, even in Illinois, if they don't want to have the health department understand or anybody else what their sample results are, they will use a private lab because it's kept private. I was reviewing a paper about a bunch of well testing in Canada, and the authors made a comment that everybody's did their testing through their health network, Health Canada, and I knew that couldn't be the case because a lot of well owners want to protect their information. So I went to the trouble of calling 2 labs in Canada to ask, do you do private well samples? And they said they do a ton of them for that very reason, that Canadian residents don't want the government knowing what their sample results are. And so it's really unusual to have a lab that isn't willing to protect, one, their individual homeowners, and 2, that the homeowners would want to share that with you all instead of just giving it to the lab. So it's an unusual situation.
And it depends on the lab. Oh, sorry, Yilin, because up here in the Panhandle, some of the labs that I've been calling and trying to get batch rates with to reduce rate, they do work with homeowners. It just depends on the lab and how willing they are to talk directly to residents about their issues and how to resolve issues.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah,
Gerald?
and
Go ahead, Yilin.
Oh, just quick comment, because the lab we used, they gave us a really good deal. And the reason they didn't want to handle samples directly from homeowners, they don't have the labor and time to answer each individual questions. That's why they don't take samples from residents directly. And for the other hand, for homeowners, they encounter some cases. So labs sell the info to water companies, or labs are water companies. So that conflict of interest, homeowners don't feel comfortable.
That makes sense. And I forgot some larger water companies certainly have their own labs. Gerald?
Well, here in Massachusetts, it's a bit different. If any lab tests water and they find any of a number of specific contaminants under MGL 21E, they have to report it to the state. So there is a strong feeling by folks who may fear that they have a contaminant. They don't want to have their water tested. Now,
by anyone, even a private lab.
I'm sorry?
By anyone, even a private
lab. By anyone.
So does that hold true for labs like Heidelberg College or TAP Score?
In Massachusetts?
No, these are companies. So Heidelberg College is in Ohio.
Well,
they have a program.
I suppose you could ship it out of state, and maybe the law wouldn't apply. But anything in the state, MGL 21E does apply. As an example,
that's what I would do.
We've been strongly urged by the Department of Environmental Protection here in Massachusetts. They want to fund in the 81 communities that are predominantly private wells, a solicitation of up to 40 private well owners, and they will do water testing of those for specifically any of the 6 primary PFAS chemicals, but anything else as well. And the result has been absolute failure in being able to obtain volunteers, because everyone's afraid of what happens if it's found that in Massachusetts, unlike many other states, the well owner is the responsible party. Even if you could determine the source, it's not the source party, but the well owner party that has to make mitigation.
Yeah, and my understanding is that that means the value of their property would go way down as well. And so I don't blame anyone for that. So, Andrew, I have a question for you about the work you did. Are there plans to improve your data set, I guess is the best way to say it? Or what I've written down is, are there plans to work on the data deficiencies so that you can improve your approach? Because obviously, that is an issue. It's a moving target. And some of the GIS work I used to do, that's frustrating. I think you're muted, or we can't hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted. You might need to change your source for your audio. Nope. I guess, yeah, this happened to me the other day, so I'm not sure what to do about this, other than maybe have you type the response in the chat, unfortunately. Something we didn't check beforehand. It's the first time.
Is that any better, Steve? Are you
That's
able to hear me now?
better. That's it.
Hey, I've got an extra webcam and an extra speaker, all kinds of stuff. So, so one of the biggest things is that the data set is aggregated from the county level on a 3-year rolling basis. So, 30, 30, 30 or thereabouts. Each year, we aggregate all that data in. And obviously, with our county assessors, it's maintained at a much more routine pace. But those data harvests take time, and then that kind of cleanup back and forth. So obviously our data is not super new when it comes to like new build outs and growth and development, which we understand. I think one of the other challenges is that the water service supply area is a 2014. And when they did the mapping, it was kind of a best available, kind of taking some paper parchment type deals and mixing them with maybe some digital and maybe some billing address review. So both of those have come under pretty hard scrutiny over the last year. Indiana's really pushed to have a large water initiative where we have our regulated water entities that are providing water, our agricultural folks, our industrial folks, and then getting those private well owners kind of at the table too, to have this bigger holistic conversation of, okay, where's the water? What do we have? How much do we actually have? And the data that we have around it, why isn't it of higher quality? If we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year as a state to dole out for programs to do this stuff, and ratepayers are also putting money in, and local community, there's a whole mix of funding that comes into this. Why is the data quality poor? Sure. And the same question was asked of assessors. Like I mentioned, ground truthing is so important when you're using this data for hazardous waste releases. We've got a pretty significant number of sites, one that's a quasi, or it's EPA as well as state site. And we've had a huge issue with private well data there, and that being the leading edge of concern about the contaminations exposure pathway. Sure. So in reviewing the data for the locality as well as the data from the well logs and seeing, maybe a commercial developer came in, all these houses have wells, but only like 4 or 5 of them actually got entered in the log and things like that. And then the assessor's record showing that the property actually has municipal water when it's outside of the water service area. So it's impossible for it to have lines. So getting that kind of data back of poor quality and pushing it up the right chains has spurred some task force in Indiana to address that sort of stuff, because it is an equity thing. Like I said in my speech, when we have over 30% of our population dependent on private water supplies, becomes a much more health burden when we have arsenic and manganese and all these other kind of one-offs that are in pockets of maybe 8 or 10,000 people here and 6 or 8,000 people there, because they don't have one big unified voice and everything else. So having those assessors that are responsible for high quality data, the utility regulatory commissions that are responsible for getting those lines drawn out and making sure they understand. Because if we're ever going to do service line replacement for lead pipes and things like that, we have to know this data. So not only is it useful for me in the private water side of things, the whole of the water infrastructure task force and everything can really take hold and go with data that's at least within a couple of years of accurate, versus some of the other situations we're in. So, well, I know it's not similar. So
sure. I know personally, I tried to do some work about 15 years ago in Indiana on arsenic. I used to do a lot of arsenic research. Mm-hmm. And I went to an area close to the Illinois border where there's a lot of sand up across from Kankakee County. Yeah. And I went door to door trying to find well information and found 2 drillers who supposedly had it. Most of it was not in your well records. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up not doing the work there because I needed to know there was 2 aquifers and I needed to know which well each well was in, which aquifer, and it just wasn't available. And so, and it's certainly a problem, manpower sometimes, all those things. So,
and Steve, you and I had a good dialogue on LinkedIn about arsenic and the USGS study that came out. And this is part of the issue too, because federal partners are going to look to the state to say, hey, give us your best available data. And if our best available data is kind of a garbage in, garbage out data set, we're going to, as states, we may look disproportionately high or low with some of those numbers because the data that's being available at the federal level hasn't been ground truth, and it's the data may be coming from a geological water survey versus someone else who's done other techniques to do it, just because of some of the silos that we work in. And that's where this conference has already, over the past several years, broken down lots of barriers and started to produce huge results.
Yeah, that study was particularly frustrating because I think it's pretty inaccurate and that's my own personal opinion. So, well, hey, thank you all. It's 1:30. We appreciate you providing your lightning talks and participating in the conference. It's good to see you guys I haven't seen for a while. Hopefully we can all meet in person next year, or at least semi. Sounds like it might even be a hybrid model, so to speak, but we'll see. So thank you. I enjoyed your presentations.